Hello, this is The Food Chain. I'm Emily Thomas. If you have a special someone in your life, is there anything about them you find a little annoying? How about when they're eating?
It's not just nauseating and kind of a little bit gross, it's also something kind of profoundly hurtful. So it's even worse watching someone that you love doing that.
I felt a little bit insulted. You can understand cultural differences in your head, but in your heart, it's hard to accept.
I like to eat in a separate room than he does. I like to eat on my little island in the bedroom. And he doesn't like that because obviously it gets scraps and stuff in the bed.
Can you have a successful relationship with someone whose eating habits you find irritating, repulsive, or even morally repugnant? With increasing food choices available to many of us, food could be becoming the ultimate passion killer.
As the modern food system has become so much more diverse and people's expectations at meals have become so individualized, I think there's much more room for people to kind of disagree about how to eat, when to eat.
As part of Crossing Divides, a BBC season bringing people together in a fragmented world, I'm going to meet 3 couples who have big disagreements about food and ask them how they handle it. What do you do when you're in love with a vegan but like nothing better than a chicken teriyaki? Or when your wife is locked in a fierce battle with your mother over whose food you prefer?
His mother and I literally would stand over his shoulder and wait for him to choose his first bite. It was very tense.
I want to know whether arguments about food are ever really just about food. Should we see them as a sign of a deeper incompatibility? Could a fight about paprika really be about power?
I was 16 and I was working in a Baskin-Robbins ice cream shop, just scooping ice cream one summer evening, and he walked in and I thought he was the most handsome, good-looking guy I'd ever seen. And I saw fireworks and it was love at first sight.
What was it like for you, Dharmesh?
Not quite love at first sight.
Ooh, awkward. Never mind. Cheryl and Dharmesh Parbu are in their late 40s and live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. His family is originally from Gujarat in Western India. She was raised in Tennessee.
I'm a very southern girl, so the kinds of things that I loved to eat were fried chicken, pot roast with potatoes, seasoned with salt and pepper, nothing spicy. I ate a lot of hamburgers and hot dogs, sort of the all-American type of food.
We were raised vegetarian, so lots of rice and vegetables and carbs and lots of spices.
Do you remember your first meal together?
Oh, yes, very much so. We went to an Olive Garden Italian restaurant, and he ordered a cheese manicotti, because that's a vegetarian thing. I had never really been around vegetarian people, so I was pretty shocked that he didn't order something with some sausage or, some sort of meat in it. And he drank milk. Had to get his protein, I suppose, in the milk.
I didn't even realize the milk thing was different.
And Cheryl, when did you first realise that you had such different attitudes to food? Was it at that meal or did that come a bit later?
It came later. It was when his mother first had me over for dinner to their house and fixed a vegetable biryani with this yogurt moto sauce that goes on it. There was no meat, and it was very spicy. And then another shocker was that they ate it with their hands. They tore off pieces of the rotli bread and scooped it up with their hands, and I kind of freaked out. So he got up and went to the kitchen and got me a spoon.
But soon after the couple got married in 1992, they began to realise their food differences were too big to be fixed by a spoon. Dharmesh was training to be a dentist, whilst Cheryl stayed at home, so she did all the cooking.
My simple, chicken and potatoes, basic foods. And that was interesting because he would put masala and anything hot and spicy on top of it that he could find. I felt a little bit insulted. Like, you can understand cultural differences in your head, but in your heart, it's hard to accept. I felt like, wow, he doesn't like my cooking.
And Dharmesh, what were you thinking at the time? Were you enjoying this food that Cheryl was making? Be honest.
It was very bland, honestly.
But Dharmesh's mum lived nearby and she'd regularly turn up at the house with meals.
She brought food anytime she could. And sometimes it was a bit of a tug of war with Mom and Cheryl because they'd both have food in front of me and watch which one I'm going to eat first. So.
I mean, that must have been quite difficult for you because you wouldn't want to offend either.
Yes, so I overate a lot.
Do you think that the attachment you felt to that food, was that about taste or was a part of it about identity?
Definitely the food, the taste of food, because that's just my comfort zone. But while I'm not the most traditional Indian guy, there are certain things that I feel very strongly about, more traditional values, and want to hang on to.
Cheryl, this tug of war, what did that look like from where you were standing?
In the very beginning, his mother and I literally would stand over his shoulder and wait for him to choose his first bite. It was very tense. She would, of course, fix 10 items to my one thing on the menu, so she always had plenty of things to pull from that she could lure him into eating. It was tough. And, part of that is a cultural thing because, me being non-Indian marrying into the family, of course it was unusual because he was raised to think he was going to have this arranged marriage to an Indian woman, and his mother would have the daughter-in-law that she would cook with in the kitchen. So it was tense. I felt a little as if that was a statement saying I wasn't a good enough wife.
Dharmesh, thinking back to those early years of marriage with your mum bringing all this food around, what do you think was going on for her? Why do you think she felt she needed to come over and feed you?
I think that's just the way Mom shows her love. She cooks endless amounts of food for everybody.
Do you think that your conflicts over food were about the food itself, or was it about what the food represented?
Oh, definitely about what the food represented, 100%. Because over the years, I have grown to love Indian food. But it definitely was a symbol of, the relationship that I had maybe with his mother and sort of Indian culture as a whole, because I wasn't really accepted for so many years. When we would get together with extended family for dinners, the women would be in the kitchen cooking, and the men would be sitting, in front of the TV. But the women didn't really welcome me in the kitchen because they spoke Gujarati, and I don't speak Gujarati. And they also have this vast knowledge that they all grew up with for the cooking. So I wasn't really included in that. And I didn't want to be in the kitchen in that role because I didn't want anyone to pressure me to fix a certain type of food because I am a meat and potatoes kind of girl, and that's okay too.
Dharmesh, why do you think that food matters so much in a relationship? Why does it matter so much that it became a source of conflict with someone that you love so much?
I think it's just a power struggle, like everything else.
Definitely. The food, I think, was just the easiest thing to really attach to, and it was the most concrete thing that we were able to get our hands around and manipulate in that culture war.
It was a food fight that raged for 23 years with little change or compromise. When they had children, Cheryl wanted her kids to eat American food, so the couple often ate separate meals. In 2015, they divorced. Cheryl and Dharmesh told me it wasn't the food to blame as such, more the culture clash it symbolised. But their story doesn't end there. 2 years ago, they remarried.
I think we're soulmates. We really belong together. Because even when we were divorced or getting divorced, we never really argued on anything. I think we just grew apart.
And when you got back together, Cheryl, food had been a source of conflict in the marriage. It was something you never saw eye to eye on. During the reconciliation and that big decision to get married again, did you talk about food and how you could navigate things differently?
It was just something that for me, I just kind of let it go, sort of like a lot of things that we just decided to let go because, we were starting over and we realized don't sweat the small stuff.
Is food the small stuff, though?
it sort of has become that way. When we eat together now, he'll eat something different, I'll eat something different, or I'll make a dish. Like we had fettuccine Alfredo last night, and I had mine with some Parmesan cheese, and he had his with some masala, and I just say whatever.
Yeah. And I think we have more of a blended menu now. Just happy to be in the kitchen together, cooking together, and having family time.
And does your mum, Dharmesh, still bring you food?
Yes, absolutely.
How often does she bring you food?
She'd bring it daily if I allowed it, but we set some boundaries and, maybe a few times a week.
You're listening to The Food Chain on the BBC World Service with me, Emily Thomas. And this week, I'm looking for compromise and talking to couples who've managed to overcome major disagreements about what and how they eat. Our next couple also faced incompatibility in the kitchen, and restaurants, and supermarkets, and bedroom. Krista Leigh Montesinos Sonido has a hormonal imbalance which gives her overwhelming cravings for sweet and salty foods. The 26-year-old never used to think twice about indulging them until she met 33-year-old Toby Vollebrecht.
I grew up in Hawaii with a really big immigrant family, so we'd have all these huge parties. And our family's around only like 40 to 50 people, but they'd have food set out for 100. When we go to restaurants with my family, we are immediate family of 4, but we'll order enough for maybe 6 to 10 people. So I definitely say my diet is varied, but it errs on the side of overeating, just because my family believed in nourishing oneself, even to the point of excess. They also have the money to spend on that stuff. I think my family spends at least $500 to $1,000 a month per person in the family for food. I never had to worry about it. Maybe Toby's family had to.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Netherlands, and my parents cooked very balanced meals consisting, I would say, roughly maybe 1/3 protein, 1/3 potato, 1/3 vegetables.
The couple met on a dating website 4.5 years ago and quickly moved in together in San Francisco. It wasn't long before tensions began to arise over food.
I also buy a lot of things that I don't need food-wise, so that's what bothered him. And so he would just be like, hey, you need to stop buying that much. I'm like, no, I'll eat it. And if I don't eat it, it's fine. And he's like, no, this is my money. So that was a difficult time, and it just sucked because it wasn't a big issue to me until he brought it up and made it an issue.
It's not only the money for me, but I also just really hate seeing food being wasted, right? I guess I know roughly how to predict how much I'm going to eat, and that will be enough, right? And I won't have anything left.
I mean, you got angry at me for not eating as healthy, and your health was kind of affected by me not eating great.
I guess I notice when I'm eating too unhealthy, I start feeling worse. So that's probably one of the reasons why I always want to eat some vegetables, right?
Over the years, the couple have found ways to compromise. They now plan ahead and budget for their weekly meals. And Toby has persuaded Krista to eat a healthier diet with more vegetables.
All of these things are to make myself be a better person. And he's not forcing me or anything. It's more of gentle encouragement.
But even gentle encouragement won't stop Krista over-ordering in restaurants.
I used to mind about that, I think mainly when I was paying for those things most of the time. But we sort of reached an agreement that I pay for other things that are more easy to predict for me. And now Krista often pays at restaurants, so that I don't have that psychological pressure or something that I feel we are over ordering and overpaying for what we are eating.
There is one area of conflict, though, that seems irreconcilable.
So we would always eat as a family together around the table.
So we didn't really eat together as a family. We just kind of ate when we felt like eating. So I think the differences are sometimes if we're eating lunch at home, I like to eat in a separate room than he does. I like to eat on my little island in the bedroom. And he doesn't like that because obviously it gets scraps and stuff in the bed if I'm eating like a sandwich or something messy.
I am definitely not a fan of that, yeah, because breadcrumbs will get in the bed and then you end up sleeping later and
I
finding
use
all
a
these...
box.
Sure, but some will always spill. Yeah, I feel like that might be one thing that keeps annoying me. But I think overall I can still be happy.
Ah, love. You know, crumbs in the sheets might be difficult for many of us to overlook, and I'm with Toby on this one. But arguably, it's not a moral or ethical issue. And that's what our final couple is facing. Saj and Rebecca are both doctors, and they've been together for 9 years. She's a vegan. He's not.
When I see anyone eat meat, but in particular Saj, it's a feeling that's quite hard to describe to people who aren't vegan. It's not just nauseating and kind of a little bit gross, it's also something kind of profoundly hurtful. So it's even worse watching someone that you love doing that, and I think that's where the tolerance has to come from.
My favourite meaty meal is a chicken teriyaki. Like, that's the thing that I really hanker for. So if I'm finishing work, I walk past this Japanese restaurant and they've got just this most amazing chicken teriyaki.
Do you tell Rebecca about it when you get home?
No, I usually don't. Just depends on how brave I'm feeling.
I went to meet Saj and Rebecca at their flat in southeast London. Occasionally, Saj smuggles in some milk chocolate desserts, but other than that, this is a meat and dairy-free zone.
Tonight is, well, it's Friday, so it's fish and chip night. So we're having a vegan version with some vegan scampi.
And can I see this fake scampi that you're going to cook? So rehydrated, textured soy and wheat protein. Saj, when you look at this, does your heart fill with joy? Would you prefer real scampi bites?
Yeah, I really like scampi, but my heart doesn't go, oh my God, give me the real stuff. I'd just be like, right, let's try it. Bring it on.
Come on, would you not prefer some sausages?
Ooh, yeah, if they're going. But if I'm eating with Beck, I always think that it's like one of my rules that we should eat together and we should always have the same meal.
Do you mind if I have a little look in your fridge? What have we got in here? So we've got vegan mayo, we've got dairy-free.
It's all sounding suspiciously harmonious.
If I have a rummage in here, Saj, am I going to find anything that that Rebecca doesn't know about? Is there a secret ham compartment?
There's definitely not.
Saj and Rebecca met whilst they were training to be doctors. At the time, she was a vegetarian.
And do you remember what you said? Go on.
I said that I'd never go out with a vegetarian because I want to make sure that, we could have good meaty meals together.
And how important was meat to you then?
I guess fairly important. Like, I wouldn't think of having a meal that wasn't with meat.
At first, Rebecca would eat a little bit of fish and chicken when she was with Saj, even occasionally cooking him sausages. But she never felt entirely comfortable with it and eventually stopped eating meat altogether. Then 2.5 years ago, she became vegan, motivated by her strong feelings about animal welfare and the environment. She says over time it's become increasingly hard to watch Saj eat meat.
I know that he eats meat, but because he doesn't do it very often in front of me, I don't have to deal with it, so I can kind of just pretend it's not happening.
Can you think of any other moral issue you could have with a partner that you'd say that about, that as long as I don't see it happening, it's okay? Because this is a disagreement about ethics. It's something quite fundamental.
No, because I think everything else that people would feel as strongly about, I think they're sort of something that everybody would ethically find a bit wobbly. But I think because veganism really does split opinion, it's hard to think of anything else that really does feel the same way.
Some people listening might be thinking, how can you actually be in a relationship with someone when you find a part of their life morally repugnant?
I think because we've been together so long and Saj is the most important person in my life, and he's made huge efforts to not eat a lot of meat and dairy, and he is kind of shifting more towards my way of thinking. It makes it a little bit more tolerable.
Do you ever think about the power dynamic in your relationship and how this food dynamic might reflect that or play into that?
Yeah. I think sometimes it appears that I wear the trousers.
Yeah,
and I think you
definitely.
sometimes, if I'm banging on a bit too much about it, you'll let me know, won't you, that I'm being really annoying and I'm controlling the situation.
Like, if it gets too much, I often say, it's really important to you, great, but I don't really need to listen right now.
When did you last see Saj eat meat?
The weekend before last.
And where were you?
We went to visit my parents, and it's like the worst situation that he could have done it in as well, because I've been telling my mum, who's also vegan, Saj is great, he's eating hardly any meat these days. And then we went out for Chinese and he ordered pork dumplings, and I just didn't make eye contact with my mum.
And Rebecca, when you watched Saj eat the pork, how did that feel?
I guess it's a mix of annoyance, because I really wish he didn't eat it, and sadness, because I thought that you weren't eating pork much anymore, and I love pigs.
Now, apparently, they didn't row about it on the way home. For these two, it's love before lamb chops, tenderness before teriyaki. But if Rebecca had been a vegan when they first met, would this relationship have ever got off the ground?
I think my militants would get on your nerves, and your meat eating would be intolerable for me.
Still, there are times when, like when you talk about, watch this or look at this picture on Facebook or this article, it's just because I love you that I'm happy to see it. But if we didn't even know each other,
I know.
And you'd start being like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? Talking from the side that did the majority of the compromising, or all of the compromising. Is it a compromise? But I know, her line is drawn in the sand and she cannot come towards me. So if I love her, then it's up to me to make sure that I can move towards her and at least help her out. So why wouldn't I?
In this episode, I've met 3 very different couples. And from what they've told me, disagreements over food don't need to matter. In fact, someone else's very different eating habits can expand your horizons. Cheryl told me she's grown to love Indian cuisine. But we've also heard that food arguments can be about so much more than food. They can reflect deeply held beliefs about money or health. They may be about power. How different might things have been if it was Saj who was vegan, or if Toby ate sandwiches in bed? These kinds of questions might be becoming more important. As global migration has grown, we're ever more likely to meet and fall for someone from a different culture. And, as my final guest told me, the amount of choice offered by our increasingly global food system could be creating more for us to disagree about. Alice Julia is Director of Food Studies at Chatham University in Pennsylvania in the US. Her research focuses on the social dynamics of shared meals.
This is a very modern problem, right? In the sense that as the modern food system has become so much more diverse and people's expectations at meals have become so individualized, I think there's much more room for people to kind of disagree about how to eat, when to eat. There's so many different ways that food is tailored to different people's individual needs and preferences. And it becomes a very significant way that people think about basically who they are in the world. So when people argue about that, they are arguing about how they want to be in the world.
So this is something that's becoming worse, you think? People are arguing more about food?
I would say it's becoming different. I think if you think about earlier systems, not everybody always ate together, but there were kind of some normative expectations, and those normative expectations were often built on, the labor of women in the household, and that was much more presumed and accepted. And so I think that's one major change, but also the fact that there's so much pressure, I think, on people these days. People believe they just don't have time. Carving out time to eat, or carving out time to decide who cooks or who makes food or where do you get food, is often really fraught.
When it comes to resolving food conflict, some of the couples I spoke to told me they've adapted their diets so they can eat the same thing as their partner, whereas others eat different things, but at the same time. I asked Alice what she thinks the best solution might be.
Ideally, right, there are ways that sharing a meal together and sharing the same food do create bonds, and they do demonstrate, sort of an ability to cross lines and understand one another. However, I think we turn the meal into this very ideological sort of moment, right? That we layer so much of society's questions and ills onto what people are doing in their households. Do we want to put all that pressure on dinner, right? Like, are there easier ways to have some sort of relationship or closeness without having all the pressure of creating this special moment? I mean, restaurant meals have skyrocketed in the last decade in terms of the percentage of meals eaten out and people eating out. So when one eats at a restaurant, one often orders something different than other people at the table. Yet those are very successful bonding social occasions. And I think the question is that possible in the household as well without creating any extra burden?
That's all for this week. Let us know what you think about the show on social media. I'm at Emily Thomas BBC on Twitter. And for more stories about the BBC's Crossing Divides season, go to bbc.com/crossingdivides. From me and the rest of the team, Simon Tulitt and Claire Williamson, thanks for listening, and join us again for The Food Chain next week.